Hey nerds, this is why Jordan Peterson thinks everyone is a Marxist. Jürgen Habermas was a 20th century pragmatist critical theorist in the Frankfurt School. He wrote the Philosophical Discourse of Modernity, in which he examined subjects like Hegel, Schelling, reason, religion, and art. I've been doing a series on atheist pragmatist Richard Rorty's book with Catholic philosopher, I should say, Gianni Vattimo, called The Future of Religion. Rorty's pragmatism is clearly different from that of Habermas in some ways. These stem from the fact that Habermas was way more of a critical theorist than a pragmatist. Rorty was way more of a pragmatist and not really a critical theorist at all. Habermas was majorly influenced by Adorno and Horkheimer, both of whom were also critical theorists in the Frankfurt School. These thinkers are all like these thinkers are always fucking conflated with so-called postmodernists or post-structuralists such as Foucault and Derrida. Pseudo-intellectual crackpot and former clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson, along with his fellow pseudo-intellectual crackpot, who is also a former mathematician, James Lindsay, endlessly blame people like Foucault and Derrida for so-called wokeism. Lindsay invented that word, wokeism, just to feel like a galaxy brain genius. It's just wokeness. But at least Lindsay seems slightly smarter than Peterson. Anyway, neither postmodernism nor critical theory has that much to do with wokeness. But critical theory is closer to that than postmodernism. One of the main reasons, among many, that they seem to blame wokeness on postmodernism and critical theory is that they call them all Marxists. That's just fucking stupid. In terms of postmodernism, Foucault is my favorite 70s pervert so-called post-structuralist philosopher. Derrida was also a post-structuralist or a so-called post-structuralist who focused more on language, while Foucault focused more on history. Postmodernism is kind of simply a straw man for post-structuralism. I say so-called post-structuralism because when Foucault and Derrida were both asked about each term separately, neither of them knew what either term meant. Dumbasses like Lindsay and Peterson just think that Derrida and Foucault were Marxists because they wrote about Marx, basically. As is the case with most philosophers, Foucault and Derrida agree with Marx on some subjects and disagreed with him on others. I've been doing a series on Derrida's book called Spectres of Marx, in which he's more critical of Marx than anything else. Let's also remember that Foucault and Derrida were sure as hell not in lockstep. They disagreed a lot, which obviously means that their views on Marx are not the same. A long time ago, I did a podcast with Peter Salmon, who wrote a biography of Derrida called An Event Perhaps, and we talked all about the similarities and differences, particularly the differences between Foucault and Derrida. So anyway, Foucault and Derrida agree and disagree with each other on the same and different topics for same and different reasons. Critical theorists in the Frankfurt School like Habermas, Adorno, and Horkheimer were closer to being Marxists than postmodernists, though. But they weren't the same as classical Marxists. They had many interesting and valid criticisms of Marx, in fact. They wrote much more about topics such as culture, history, and aesthetics, particularly Habermas. He was often false. They are all of the critical theorists are often falsely labeled as cultural Marxists, even by philosophers who are a lot smarter than Peterson and Lindsay. And no, I'm not calling Lindsay and Peterson philosophers. That's not what I mean. They're sure as hell not philosophers. Critical theorists in the Frankfurt School are falsely called cultural Marxists because some of them often get into subjects like how Marxism continued to impact culture and aesthetics in their modern Western culture long after the Berlin Wall fell. They're very different from actual Marxists in the classical sense because they did not adopt Marxism as their political ideology. Kind of fucking important, man. Like, they were not classical Marxists. They just wrote about Marx. Habermas wrote quite a bit on George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who was an 18th and 19th century philosopher of German idealism. Hegel heavily influenced my favorite contemporary Hegelian / Lacanian / Marxist philosopher, Slavoj Žižek. I've been doing a series on his book called Less Than Nothing. I've been learning a lot about Hegel lately from Zizek's book, in addition to Habermas's Philosophical Discourse of Modernity. Zizek had a famous debate years ago with Jordan Peterson about Marxism, in which they actually had a fairly interesting conversation. However, anyone who studies philosophy at all is well aware that Zizek was almost undeniably treating Peterson with enormous kid gloves. Anyway, this is how dumb and intellectually lazy Peterson and Lindsay are. They pretty clearly think that nothing more than writing about Marx and associating with people who have left-wing views makes you a Marxist. Seriously, that's their fucking kindergarten level of intellect. These galaxy brain geniuses seem to literally believe that if you write about Marx and hang out with lefties, you're a Marxist. That's it. That's how incredibly simple the thinking is of these idiots.